Ever thought about starting your own creative studio? You are not alone. Every day countless photographers and videographers dream about building a space of their own, a place that inspires, a place that works. But here's the truth, most of them fail. Not because they lack talent, but because they don't understand the business. So how do you make it work? How do you build a studio that not only looks great, but actually survives in a brutal industry? Today I will take you behind the scenes of exactly how we built our first space, what worked, what failed, and what nobody tells you before you start. This video is going to be more personal than usual. Right now I'm sitting in our main studio in Warsaw, around 800 square meters of scenographic spaces, and this year we will be adding next 400. But our beginnings were in much smaller place, a space my friend and I created years ago as a fun project, and today was a last day that very first studio functions. Back then my friend Matthew and I had already been doing artistic photography for a few years. As you can see, we were really into scenographic work, creating detailed, visually striking setups. Most of the time we improvised with whatever locations we had access to or rented studios and designed spaces for more planned sessions. It was fun and completely self-funded, which meant our options were pretty limited. That's when we started thinking, why not create our own space? A place designed specifically to be as visually stunning and photogenic as possible. We knew we could afford to fund and maintain it thanks to our day jobs in a completely different industry, so in reality this was more of a hobby project. That financial safety net made it easier for us to take the leap and create our own studio. And what's more important, we accepted the possibility that we will fail in business. If you can prepare enough to be sure not to fail, that's great, but most of the experience comes from failed projects. Now, if you go online, you will find a million business gurus telling you to draw up market analysis and bulletproof business plans. Here's what we did instead. We took a leap relying on our day jobs to fund this project. It was scary, it was risky, but it let us explore a creative vision that a rigid business plan might have killed. And I know that not everyone can do that. Not everyone is in a position to risk their savings. But if you can, it might be the spark that turns a dream into reality. The studio market is brutal. It's essentially a commodity where cheap prices dominate and average consumer expects much more than they want to pay. For the long-tail clients that actually have the budget, it's a closed-off industry built on connections and personal branding, where you need a lot of time to build on top of that. Most small studios owners don't even know how to make their spaces profitable, and honestly, a lot of their advice isn't that great. Of course, we weren't starting completely from scratch. We already knew the artistic photography scene in our country pretty well, but we were just beginning to connect with people in more professional circles. We also knew that scenographic studios were practically non-existent in Europe, aside from a handful of exceptions, and to be honest, most of them didn't really match our vision. But critiquing others is always easier than actually building something better yourself. And we had no idea if we could pull off a space that truly stood out among the many commercial studios out there. On top of that, there was always the chance that our artistic taste just didn't align with the industry commercial needs. Maybe we were just a couple of photography nerds stuck in an echo chamber, patting ourselves on the back while completely missing what the market actually wanted. That kind of disconnect happens all the time in the creative world. Now, after building nearly 1000 square meters of scenographic spaces, the largest studio of its kind in Poland, I can say with confidence that we had a mix of both good luck and strong intuition about what would work in the industry. What you see now is our very first studio. The original scenography here is still about 90% untouched. When we first built it, we thought we would have to change the setup completely every year. But here we are, 4 years later, and clients are still interested in using it. That said, a few days ago we officially closed this space to clients. It's just not big enough for larger productions anymore, and managing it has become a logistical challenge, especially now that we have much bigger spaces that we are still expanding. But this isn't the end of that space. Our friend, a well-known Polish photographer, will be taking over, and with any luck, this space will continue to serve as a learning ground for young photography students for years to come. Now let's get into the details. Keep in mind that every country, and even every city has its own unique landscape when it comes to commercial photography and videography. That's why doing your research is absolutely critical. The best way? Visit every studio in your area, even if there are dozens of them. But even if you do that, let me save you some time and tell you the most important thing up front. Studios with plain white walls and cycloramas will not cover your rent. The reason is simple. Rental prices for those kinds of studios are extremely low. Why? Because most small photo studios are run by photographers who use that space for their own work. They are not focused on making a profit from studio rentals. They are willing to break even or even take a small loss because owning the studio benefits their personal business. If you're thinking of running a studio as a real business, this is a terrible model. Here's why. If you lower your own photography rates just because you have your own studio, you're basically telling clients that your work isn't valuable enough to justify proper rental prices. That's a dangerous game. You end up stuck in the low-income market and at the same time you are running an unprofitable studio just to keep your personal business afloat. In other words, you are working for your company instead of your company working for you. The problem isn't just personal, it affects the entire market. Because so many unprofitable studios are kept alive by their owner's side income, rental prices stay ridiculously low, making it nearly impossible to run a studio as a sustainable business. Take Warsaw, Poland, for example. There are dozens of tiny studios charging rock-bottom rates, while high-end studios with massive spaces and top-tier facilities are only charging 2 times more. The price gap between a cramped 30 square meters white wall cubicle and a white hall with a 10 meters ceiling and a massive cyclorama is way too small. If you actually try to crunch the numbers and make it profitable, you will go grey in no time. So yeah, that kind of studio was never an option for us. The math doesn't work. The market is unhealthy and honestly, there's nothing exciting about running a generic photo studio with basic backdrops and low-budget fashion shoots. And this topic goes even deeper than that. When you are working in the low-budget side of the industry, shooting on simple backdrops with 1 or 2 strobes and softboxes, it's easy to assume that this is what the entire market looks like. But take a step back, forget about what you do for a second and actually look around. Check out magazine covers, billboards, high-end ad campaigns. Watch 20 random commercials on social media or TV. How many of them could realistically be shot with a basic setup? Almost none. The truth is, really commercial work rarely relies on just a white wall and a backdrop. If that's all you are focusing on, you are looking at the smallest, least valuable part of the market, one that's crowded with amateur projects and low-budget shoots. And that's where so many people get their market research completely wrong. If you only look at what's being produced in those tiny generic studios, you will start thinking that's all the industry needs. But in reality, most of what you see in those spaces isn't the kind of work you should be building a studio for. It's the kind you should be running from. In a way, we were lucky. From the beginning, we were interested in high-end professional productions, the kind that require teams of 20 to 50 people at least, not just a single photographer and a softbox. We started as amateurs, but we were always aiming for the top. And because of that, we wanted to create a space that would push us in the direction of a real business, not just another small-time rental studio. Think about it. If a basic studio wasn't good enough for our own personal projects, why would we build a business around it? That would have been completely disconnected from our skills and ambitions. And here's something important to understand. Renting out a studio is not the same as providing a valuable service. Before you jump into creating a business, ask yourself, what problem are you actually solving? Because trust me, the problem of where can I rent a white wall studio has already been solved. And honestly, it barely solves any real problems for serious photo and video work. At the time, we didn't fully understand the market yet, but we did know that our work was already at a high level. People were asking us to teach workshops on photography and cinematic lighting, so we had the confidence that we were on the right track. Initially, our goal was simple: solve our own problem. We wanted a space where no matter where you pointed your camera, you could capture something beautiful. That's why this started started as a hobby project. What we didn't realize back then was that this exact problem, creating visually stunning environments, was actually the foundation of many successful businesses in the commercial visual industry. And here's another key point. Video is leading the market now, not photography. If you are thinking about creating a studio, you need to consider visuals as a whole, not just frozen frames. In the low-end market, you are also dealing with individual clients, private consumers and one-person businesses. And if there's one thing everyone in the industry agrees on, is that the consumer market is the toughest. Why? Because individual clients usually have little to no budget, they are often hard to satisfy, and they tend to expect way more than what they are paying for. On top of that, most of them have no clue how to properly use a studio space, and often they just want to rent it for an hour, thinking that's enough. And that's a huge problem for studios. See, studio rentals aren't scalable. If you rent your space for one random hour in the middle of the day, you block out a potential business client who might have booked the whole space for a full 12-hour day at a much higher rate. That's why from the very start we set a minimum rental time of 3 hours to filter out those small-scale clients. Because here's the reality: more than 90% of our income came from small and mid-sized businesses, not individual customers. And those business clients not only paid way more, but they also respected the service. They understood the terms and they actually paid for their reservations, even if they had to cancel last minute. Individual clients? Not so much. They often wouldn't even show up. And since in this industry you typically don't charge before the service, that's just lost income. Sure, you could set up a system to require upfront payment from individuals, but that's just another layer of management hassle. And when your main goal is to attract business clients, you want the rental process to be as smooth as possible. The less friction, the better. So at some point, you have to accept this trade-off. If you want to land bigger clients, you have to let go of the smaller ones. This also affects how you structure your additional services. Take lighting gear, for example. In smaller studios, it's common to offer a basic lighting setup for free as part of the rental price. But in film production, equipment rental is the norm. Every gig requires different gear, and crews are used to paying for whatever they need. That means you can actually rent out your equipment at standard rental rates, and clients will happily pay because it's way more convenient than picking everything up from a rental house and returning it after the shoot. But if you start handing out free gear just because some individual clients expect it, you are cutting off an important revenue stream for the business clients who actually expect to pay for it. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the classic business rule: sell to the rich, not to the poor. Easier said than done, of course. In our case, the studio was unprofitable for a long time before we built a reputation as a space worth the higher price. And when we say higher price, we mean double or more what the most white wall studios of the same size were charging. And that's the key difference. Instead of competing on price, we competed on value. The most obvious value of the studio like this is the space itself, fully furnished and designed to meet a variety of photo and video production needs. Over the years, this place has been used by small photography companies, commercial video shoots, and even TV networks for interviews. We have had clients we never expected would film here, including Netflix, which used this space for a commercial promoting one of their flagship series. Now, keep in mind, our first studio comfortably fits around 15 to 20 people at most, but for that Netflix shoot, they brought in over 50 people. And we are talking about a regular apartment in a residential building, right in the city center, not a production facility designed for this kind of scale. The crew even had to rent out a nearby schoolyard just to accommodate their production camp. Realistically, this space wasn't made for productions of that size, but they still wanted to shoot here. Why? Because recreating a similar look from scratch in a large production hall would have cost them dozens of times more. If you work in film production, you probably know how standard that approach is and how expensive it can get. That's why, despite the limitations, this space still had major value. So if you are ever debating whether building your own studio is worth the effort, just remember how much leverage a well-designed space can give you compared to building sets from the ground up. Beyond those rare, high-profile shoots, there's another common reason clients choose a space like this. Many productions don't have a clear vision for their set design. Their budget isn't big enough to build custom sets from scratch, but it's high enough that they are looking for unique, high-profile locations, and they are willing to pay a premium for them. And that's where on-site service becomes the key. On a big production, chaos is inevitable. The more people involved, the more small problems pop up throughout the shoot. Not everyone on set is a top-tier expert. Many of them are just assistants doing physical labor, and some of them are highly creative but not technical at all. And then there are clients who have no idea what's actually happening. Add in the exhaustion of a 10-hour shoot, the stress of tight schedules, and suddenly everyone starts asking the studio assistant for help, sometimes with the strangest requests. Here's one example. One day a gaffer, the lighting guy, came up to me and asked, "Hey, do you have any big metal cans like Campbell's tomato soup?" So, if someone asks for something that specific, you would assume that it's part of the set design, right? Wrong. Turns out they were filming a tall guy sitting on a tall chair at the table. And the table was too short. They needed something sturdy to place under the legs to raise it up. Obviously, I didn't have any soup cans lying around, but I did find a better solution that worked perfectly. This is the kind of problem solving that happens all the time on set. Sometimes it's just a little things like that. Other times it's huge technical issues like helping the gaffers light the space in a way that actually works for the production. When you understand the needs of a shoot, you can save the day in a ways that make a real difference. And when that happens, well, next time they need a studio, guess who they are calling first? This time with a paid booking up front. This all comes down to one simple idea: deliver more than you are paid for. In our current big studio, where productions are on a completely different level, we don't just rent out a space. We provide hardware rentals, gaffers, assistants, and even pre-production consulting to help clients adapt the space to their needs. But what really sets us apart is how we design the space itself. Everything is built to be flexible. We have movable walls, detachable windows, and mirrors that aren't mounted but instead suspended on tripwires from ceiling rails. Our bathtub? It's not fixed, it's on wheels. We even have a mobile water installation that can connect to any part of the bathroom setup. Designing a beautiful space is one thing, but making it adaptable? That's what takes it to the next level. And it was this realization that made us start looking for even bigger space. Our first studio was a proof of concept. It worked, but at just 100 square meters it was simply too small. Only half of that space was even usable for shooting. Most of it was taken up by technical and social areas. And here's something we learned the hard way. When you scale up to bigger productions, you don't just need more shooting space, you need even more space for the crew. At first we thought maximizing every square meter for scenography would attract more clients. More sets, more options, bigger appeal, right? But in reality that's not how it works. In this business you have to satisfy two key players. The first is the end client, the one actually paying for the final visuals. But they are usually not the ones booking the studio. That's done by the production company. And production teams don't just look at how the set looks. They need to know if they can actually fit the crew inside. They care about storage, social areas and background facilities just as much as the shooting space itself. And of course we didn't know all of this at first. When we moved to a bigger space we made some mistakes, important ones. But that's part of the learning process. Our second studio space was a big upgrade, 400 square meters, with way more room for crews. But we had to build everything from scratch, because when we got it, it was in a rough, almost unworkable state. In biggest room we designed 4 different scenographic sets, all with movable walls and a cohesive vintage aesthetic. In second room we built a space that leans more into modern glamorous vibe, while still incorporating some vintage elements. And then there's the standard cyclorama space. And no, cyclorama doesn't actually make us money. Like I said before, these types of spaces aren't profitable, so instead of relying on it for revenue, we use part of it for production support, makeup stations, a changing room and storage for larger shoots. And when a big video production needs high quality photos, they don't have to leave the location. Everything is under one roof, which adds value. The cyclorama itself might not be a direct moneymaker, but it's often the deciding factor for clients choosing us over other studios that require multiple bookings in different locations. That said, we made mistakes. Again, we didn't plan the social spaces or technical facilities properly. It was a dumb mistake, but when you are rushing construction and doing most of the work yourself, things slip through the cracks. We knew we needed bigger spaces for large teams, but somehow we didn't prioritize separating technical areas from the recording spaces. We wanted every part of the studio to look beautiful, so we used sound curtains to divide the sets. In theory, that made sense, but in reality, it didn't work. Big crews make a lot of noise, and you need solid walls, not curtains, to keep the production space isolated. We basically connected all our spaces with an open kitchen, which sounded like a great idea but turned out to be impractical. Another issue? We had two beautiful, highly functional spaces, but only one small kitchen, and it wasn't properly separated. That meant we couldn't accommodate two crews working at the same time, which limited our ability to scale. And after only a year of running the business, we still didn't have enough data to know if this setup was truly sustainable. In this industry, patience is the key. Traditional marketing barely works. Private clients almost never book these kinds of venues, and it takes time for agencies and production companies to even realize you exist. But we weren't ready to stop there. We knew we could do better. We identified problems with our last two studios, and in the end, we took over another floor in the same building, doing another personal investment in this whole studio idea. This time we designed two spaces that didn't exist anywhere else in our city. An elegant, spacious saloon with a small stage and an open central area for adaptations, plus a full bathroom set with 3 rooms and movable fixtures. This time we made sure to include fully separated social and technical rooms with sound-isolated walls. And this setup? It worked well. After another year, we finally saw the business take off, and we started looking at ways to expand further. That's also why we decided to shut down our original proof-of-concept studio. In the end, it was profitable, but only enough to cover an employee salary and a small bonus for the owners. Meanwhile, most of our clients who started there naturally transitioned to our newer, higher-end spaces. So by closing our first studio, we didn't really lose business. We just shifted it, and along the way we refined our focus. Our new studios cater almost exclusively to business clients, while the first studio was still attracting a lot of individual consumers. So, is this a success story? Honestly, I don't know yet. The business is finally profitable, but since we reinvest every penny and a lot of our own money into scaling up, we are still a long way from breaking even on the full investment. Time will tell. But beyond the business side, the process of building something like this is transformative on a personal level. What started as an amateur project, though with almost professional level skills, evolved into real, viable business experience. We had to develop skills across the board, from photography and videography to production management, accounting, sales, marketing and PR. And here's something to tell you. I used to co-own an IT startup. We secured millions in funding, and I managed a dozen-person team of specialists for almost 6 years. On paper, that sounds like a much bigger endeavor, so you would think it would have given me more experience, right? But that's not how it works really. When you have funding, you also have specialists handling everything. You can outsource the stuff you don't understand, and that's actually a huge risk, because if you don't know anything about a part of your business, you cannot properly evaluate the people you are hiring to do it. Worse, you might not even know how to explain what you need. This is how businesses end up wasting money on bad hires or making decisions that don't actually help them grow. That's why I love projects that start from the ground up, hands-on. You don't realize how much you don't know until you have to figure it out yourself. If we hadn't had the luxury of testing things with our own first studio, we wouldn't have known what skills we actually needed or when to bring in help, because at some point in any profitable business you will need a team. And beyond the business and skill building, there are personal growth opportunities too. For example, we never would have started running high-level cinematic lighting workshops without having our own studio. And without them, I wouldn't have launched this channel or started teaching in person and other group workshops. So I will leave you with this. I don't know if this video inspired you to build your own studio or completely scared you off from the idea. Either way, I hope it gave you a better understanding of this business. And if you are interested in how I help other photographers and videographers create beautiful visuals, check out the links in the description. Don't forget about subscribing and see you in the next video.